Hey everyone, and welcome back to Nat Chat, where we're currently exploring what to do as a college student or a recent graduate who is dissatisfied with the existing system of grades, resumes, and one-size-fits-all careers, and who's looking to build a lifestyle that they're more excited about instead. In this episode, I'm joined by Matthew Barby. Matt and I have gone back and forth on Twitter for years, talking about marketing and startup related things, but never gotten on the phone to chat. So I wanted to bring him in and finally get to talk more in depth and to share some of his story with you, because I think a lot of people listening will find it very relevant. Matt leads the global growth and SEO strategy for HubSpot, a public company with thousands of employees, and has one of the best marketing and startup growth blogs on the internet. He got that job when he was just a few years out of college because he worked relentlessly to master the kinds of marketing work that ended up getting him noticed there. He was working with a small agency out of a shed, as he puts it, and hammering away at trying to get sites more traffic day and night and learning everything he could along the way. We got a little into the weeds on marketing stuff at a couple of points here, so if you're not interested in that, just skip forward 30 seconds a minute and we'll usually have moved on. Even if you're not interested in marketing, there's a lot to learn here about how you can go out and just be very diligent about mastering whatever it is you're interested in so that you get discovered for these amazing opportunities. So if you want to know how to effectively develop that valuable skill set outside of school and reach the top of your field, Matt's a really great guy to emulate. And so with that, let's welcome him to the show. Hey.
What's going on, man?
Good to finally talk.
Yeah, likewise.
Where am I catching you? Are you back at HubSpot now, or?
Yeah, I am. I'm in our Boston office right now. I've been we did last week a kind of experiment at HubSpot where the entire team went remote. So we had some people in Barcelona, some people in Norway, Chicago, Boston, all over the place. So last week was just a giant, insane week. And I'd been doing a bunch of traveling the couple of weekends before. So it's a nice feeling to just hop in the office for a period of time right now.
I feel you. I feel like there's this constant fluctuation between I really want to go travel and do fun stuff and run around, and then you do it for a bit, and then it's all right, I really just want to feel stable and have some normalcy again.
Agreed.
Where were you during the remote week? Did you stay there, or did you get to travel somewhere fun?
I actually just I stayed in Boston because the 2 weeks prior to that, I was over in Sydney and then Seattle. So I just got back and I was like, whoa, I'm so jet lagged. I can't face getting on another flight somewhere. So I kind of just did co-working spaces, cafes, stuff like that. The biggest challenge was Wi-Fi. It still baffles me this day and age now that you still struggle to be able to do most things. Even in coffee shops or even in co-working spaces, the Wi-Fi is usually pretty shit. So
what were you doing in Sydney?
We were running a Grow with HubSpot event. It's we have our big inbound conference, and then we have one of our smaller, more regional conferences that we build out for kind of the HubSpot partners, and then also for some of their prospects. So I was doing one of the keynotes. It was pretty insane. Usually those events, we'll get a few hundred people, and we're pretty happy with that. It was over 1,000 people.
Oh, wow.
This event. Yeah, it was pretty insane. I turned up at 7 a.m. thinking, okay, right, I'll get there early. No one's going to be around. I'm going to just get some breakfast. Chill. It was rammed everywhere. But I was only in Sydney for 3.5 days. And so it's
a lot of time zones for 3 days.
Yeah, right. But no, it was good fun. It was good fun. Sydney's a really cool place. First time I went there. So no, it was awesome.
Yeah, I really wanted to go. It's just one of those places, kind of like Asia, where if you're going to go there, I would want to give it at least 2-3 weeks, for the number of time zones, for the amount of time you're on a flight. It's hard to do a quick trip. You can slightly easier do a shorter trip to South America, Europe.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because it was 30 hours journey from Boston. It was rough. So yeah, that was tough going. But it was all good. It was kind of the only nice thing about that was the fact that with 3.5 days, you don't quite acclimatize to the time zone. So when you come back, you kind of time zone neutral on the jet lag. It's not too bad.
And when you were in Seattle, you were speaking as well, right? At MozCon?
Yeah, I was doing MozCon. that was like on a whole new level. That was actually my first year doing MozCon.
What is MozCon, by the way, just for anybody listening who doesn't know?
Yeah, so MozCon is the like annual conference put on by Moz, the marketing software company, and kind of like brings together. It started out with its roots more around SEO and it's kind of like spanned out a bit now. I'd say even now it's a bit more lent towards like part inspirational talks, and then the rest is like tactical marketing talks in there as well. So it's kind of nice balance. But the thing that's great about MozCon, this is what I really like, especially when I'm speaking at places, it's all a single track talk. So everyone goes to every single talk.
Oh, you're not competing with other speakers.
Right. So you don't have to do like catchy titles for the talk to try and bring people in and maybe it's not matching their expectation. You can just be like super descriptive. It's like, this is actually what you're going to get. And that's that. So, and you get a much bigger crowd, which is great.
Yeah, I imagine. What were you speaking about?
So I was talking about a few different things. One of the things was like about running growth in general and building a framework for experimenting and also failing and like enabling your team to fail at things. And in particular, like how we look at in the context of SEO at HubSpot and tons of experiments and figure out like what are the things that we need to spend most of our time on right now. And then the way we look at acquisition as a whole at HubSpot is like, what are our best performing channels and what would we do if tomorrow they just cease to exist? So we've been doing like a lot of stuff with just taking advantage of whole new opportunities. Like we're building an Alexa skill, we're building chatbots, we're just like making massive bets on areas just on the premise that we don't want to be too stuck in our comfort zone, because we have seen some channels that we've historically relied on pretty heavily start to suffer fatigue. And now we're like, okay, we don't want to just be reactive in these situations. We want to kind of like have something that we're ramping up in the background to counterbalance any fatigue on those channels. What
have you seen start to get fatigued, if you can say?
Historically, organic search has been the biggest driver of revenue for HubSpot. Like we basically, it's a great story with HubSpot to sell to customers on the marketing product side, because we sell a marketing automation, an inbound marketing platform, and we pretty much built the business by rolling out an inbound marketing campaign, right? That was really successful. And historically, like organic search equated to proportionally as like a breakdown of where our revenue came from. It would be a minimum of like 70%. Up until like a few years ago, we didn't even really any paid. Right. So it's like now we've shifted into bringing in whole new products in, and in particular, our sales products. So we have our CRM. And one of the challenges we found there was in organic search, we perform really well when people are directly looking for a CRM. They know what they want and they're like, hey, okay, I just want this specific thing. Those people that are more passive, like, and maybe don't know they need something right now, but we want to catch them a bit further up in the top of the funnel. It's a lot more difficult to capture those salespeople versus the marketers that we were trying to capture before. And what that's meant is we've pretty much had to rely solely on like people who know what they're looking for. The challenge now is we've done a really good job of SEO. We're pretty much there for everything we need to be. And now it's like we've hit a ceiling of demand. We can't make people search more or need a CRM more to the scale that we need. So it's like, okay, how do we solve this problem? Which is usually a good problem to be in, but is a very challenging thing when you want to take like that next growth leap from an acquisition point of view.
And that's sort of your main role there, right? You're the global head of growth and SEO.
Yeah, so I look after all acquisition for our sales products. So I have the SEO team that is on my team. We have people looking after like partnerships and what we're kind of like calling one-click installs right now, where we're just looking to bed ourselves into other products and integrations. We have kind of more of a brand and campaigns-driven team, which are very much focused around grow demand for the CRM and trying to solve this problem. And one new channel that we've just opened up, just made a hire into the team, is affiliate. And we're just building out a whole brand new affiliate program from the ground up. So tons of stuff going on. But my role is just piling free users into our sales products because it's a freemium product as well.
Right, right. And I didn't realize this when I first discovered HubSpot, but it's a massive company, right?
Yeah. I remember when HubSpot first approached me a few years back, and I was like, okay, like it's a pretty massive blog, right? It's like we still have people now like, wait, HubSpot's not just a blog. But yeah, I mean, market cap is like 2.5 billion. We're a public company. We have pretty big revenue numbers. So it's a big company. And in terms of like employee size, over the past 2 years, this place has exploded. So I actually joined in our European HQ over in Dublin. And at that time, I mean, there must have been like 50 people in the office maximum. We were in like this tiny office at the time. And I think I was employee number 700 and something across the company. Now I think we're just about to hit 2,000 employees in the Dublin office alone. By next year, we want to have a total of 500. It's unreal. Now I'm over in our Boston office, and yeah, we got like 1,200 people here. We have offices in Japan and just opened a Berlin office. So it's just like consistently exploding in growth. But yeah, not many people realize like how big HubSpot actually is.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you've got a pretty senior role there, and you're also a pretty young guy, right? How old are you?
Yeah, so I'm 27.
27. Yeah, wow. Okay, so that's really impressive. How did that opportunity come about? Because most people your age aren't at these kind of senior leadership roles in massive companies like this.
It's a pretty good story, actually, because I was heading up at a big agency in the UK at the time. And this is about 2.5 years ago now. And I get a call from someone from HubSpot. And I'd actually been getting a bunch of phone calls from people at HubSpot at the time trying to sell HubSpot to me. And I actually get this phone call and I just like hang it up. I'm like, no, I don't want to be sold to. I'm like, hang up this. It was actually the then VP of content, Joe Chernov, who was calling me up. And he like drops me this email like, hey, Matt, not trying to sell you anything. Just want to have a chat. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a bit strange. And in all honesty, I didn't know too much. Like I knew enough about HubSpot, but I didn't realize the scale, what you were saying there. I had this call and I spoke with Joe, and what he basically told me was our CEO, Brian Halligan, had read a blog post that I'd published on my blog. I have absolutely no idea how Brian stumbled across this blog post, maybe LinkedIn or something. And I think it was something about how like the diminishing returns of purchasing Facebook ads for likes or something along those lines. Brian read this post and he was like, oh, we should go chat to this guy, see if he wants to like come over. Suppose it helped that I was in the UK and we were at the time and we were trying to build out the Dublin piece. So I had this conversation. They're like, okay, come and have a chat. And they offered me a role to really at the start focus very specifically on SEO. They're like, right, we want you to like lead the way for growing organic search at HubSpot. And I was like, cool. So I'm thinking, okay, there's going to be like a team of like 20 SEO people. It's going to be super advanced. So I'm like, how big is this team? They're like, no, Matt, you're going to be the team. I was like, wait, what? We have like millions of visitors from organic search and there was like no team at all. It'd just been this powerhouse of a content team in HubSpot that was a significant size that had just scaled up this growth.
So wait, they hadn't been thinking about SEO strategically at all? It had just sort of been happening from publishing regularly?
I wouldn't want to say they hadn't been thinking about it strategically. They certainly hadn't been thinking about it from a technical perspective, right? Like what was happening, like the HubSpot money machine of put $1 in, take $3 or $4 out in terms of we produce this amount of content, we get these number of leads each month, and the more we push in, the more we get out. That was working, and it was working really, really well. So it's like, we're going to invest load in content. And the content team were all, and still continue to be like a team of hustlers. So they're like, right, they're just going to like self-learn stuff, pick things up. They see certain things are working. Everyone in HubSpot had like a general base knowledge in the marketing team of SEO. But when I came in, it was like, okay, we have a ton of content, we have tons of traffic, but no one's really focused on like the link architecture, figuring out like where there are like inefficiencies through the site. And it just, in all honesty, I came in, I was like, I have so many quick wins here. It was great. I mean, literally one thing that I did in like restructuring some of the internal linking architecture pretty much added 50% in organic traffic overnight to our site. So I came in, it was boom, an extra few million visitors. And we were like, this is great. It's actually a perfect showcase of the benefits of investing in like technical SEO So that was great. And then from there, it was like, okay, we need to now grow up on the acquisition side of things. We spun out and built an optimization team, which was our first steps into like a more traditional growth team. And we started working around there. I then built out and brought in Victor Pan, who was formerly from WordStream, to be the head of SEO here. Super talented guy, probably one of the most intelligent technical SEOs I've ever worked with. He has a team now working on this, and now we need to go explore other channels. And I've kind of just been someone who's just finding problems and figuring out ways to solve them. So it's been good fun.
That sounds like it. And then as all of that has worked out, you've kind of been able to move up and build out that team with you. So how big is that team now?
That team is now, I think we're 10 people that directly into myself. And then the great thing about HubSpot is we have incredible internal resources. So we'll roll out a strategy and then it's like, okay, well, now we'll link up with our academy team. That's like another 10, 15 people. And then we have the content team that'll be like 10, 20 people. And then, so what we work and operate as an acquisition team is building the strategy and pulling in then the resources and sometimes spinning up like micro project teams, especially when we're working on like product changes. And then, so we really have the ability to tap into pretty much the entire marketing team, which is, I'd say, close to 200 people now, which is like growing pretty quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's so helpful too, because I know a lot of people who try to work on this stuff, especially at, very early stage company. They have basically the exact opposite problem where you have no resources and you have to try to do everything for cheap or free. And when you do have some of that you can tap into, your options really increase for all the experiments you can run, kind of like you were talking about before.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges that does come with this is you've got increased layers of bureaucracy, right? Like there is a significant portion of my time that's spent navigating the politics of getting things done. Like there are a number of things which happens in any organization. I think HubSpot's particularly good for this, but you can't just make a change and say, hey, look, this is the right thing for us to do and just go rogue all the time, because it's going to fuck with everything everyone else is doing, right? And getting buy-in from people. And when we start doing a lot more, like more recently, working closer with product, you're taking engineering time away from building our product and solving problems our customers have towards generating net new customers, or at least free users, into the product. So there's like this consistent trade-off with where do we take time from and resources. It's like this risk to reward scenario. We have to build a case for that internally. And I think that can often be a real tough thing for someone who's never had to navigate those kind of things before. There's been a lot of learning curves that I've certainly faced, but I do enjoy that. I like the chase part of it as well, which is good fun.
The chase being trying to make all of the parts work nicely together.
Right.
How did you learn to navigate that? Was it just trial by fire, or because you were working mostly at smaller companies before, right?
Yeah. So I was working with bigger companies, but on a more consultative level. So you didn't have to navigate that much in the same sense. I think there's been two ways that I would say I've figured out how to navigate things internally. One has been working with great people here at HubSpot that really know how to kind of like navigate their way around the company org, kind of play the game a little bit to make sure that you can get heard at the right time and build the case of the right people. That's been like one big part. The second big thing, and I would actually say this is probably the most important thing that I've been doing over the past year at least, is every week I line up a short meeting, like 15, 20 minutes or so, with someone at a different company that I've never met before that works and operates in a similar role, and just ask them about some of the problems that they have. It tends to be like more lent towards acquisition problems and how they've like figured out solving some of those, and just have like super passive chats. And a lot of those, especially when I speak to bigger companies, I find it's less like, oh, look, we're trying to grow traffic, but we just don't know how. It's more like, okay, we have this idea, but it's trying to get everyone aligned to doing it. And just, I'll tend to find and take tidbits from all these different people that I'm speaking to and just then apply them into some of our scenarios. And I would say I probably 90% of everything I've learned over at least the past 12 months have come from those small chats I've had with people.
It's so interesting because that's something I've heard a few times now from people who are working higher up in both in the expertise level right? Where once you're beyond sort of the recipes, formulaic approach to doing things at much higher conceptual levels, that those little conversations with other people working on it seem to be so helpful. So how are you finding these people and talking with them?
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think like for me, it's moved past the need for tactics, right? Like the challenge that I often find when we'll go through and be like, okay, what's this like new tactic? Sometimes there's things where I'll be like, oh, that is actually really cool and smart, never heard of it, and it can be applied right now. Challenge of tactics is like they are very contextually biased, right? So there's like certain tactics will only work in certain scenarios. And the second thing is they pretty much have diminishing returns from the moment you find out about it. So it's like there's a challenge with scalability. And that's why with these meetings that are set up, it's very much just problem driven. Like I want to know every problem anyone's ever faced in any role related to mine so that I can prepare for that problem eventually happening to me. And the way I initially went about lining up some of these meetings was like, I just spent 2 hours going through my LinkedIn initially. And I was like, right, who have I actually had a conversation with to begin with? And who would be just up for a very passive, casual chat? Trying to think how I can initially add some value is like, I can share some of my problems because we'd solved a bunch of things in interesting ways and just go through there. So I lined up like a couple of chats in 1 week. And I remember speaking to the team actually over at Typeform.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they told me some really cool, interesting things. And I remember at the end of the meeting, it was like, Sanka, Typeform was like, hey, you should go chat to these people and these people. And I was like, yeah, sure, do some intros. And I was like, you should go speak to these people. Now, like, I pretty much have a backlog of people that's just this flywheel of like intros that just ends up happening. And anytime that I'm speaking at a conference or if I ever go and attend things, I'll just be like, okay, who's here that I can go have like a quick coffee with? And then I just be like, okay, the last thing I always say to people during these meetings that I line up is, who do you recommend I go speak to next? Right. And then they'll be like, you should speak to this person. So it's like now I rarely kind of like just approach people unless it's, oh, these people are doing something really interesting. I want to know what they're doing. Now it's just usually like, hey, Matt, yeah, let's line up a chance to chat. And sometimes like podcasts and things are another great way I find like of just like having a bit of a chat and where it's mutual beneficial value to both people involved. And then you can have some intros afterwards and stuff. So,
yeah, well, I mean, we've been talking on Twitter for 2 years. it took us doing a podcast episode to finally get on the phone. So
right. Yeah, and I find that a lot with people that I like just tweeted to or engaged with in some kind of community somewhere. And it's like, I feel like I've chatted to them a bunch, but I haven't actually had a conversation with someone face to face. When I was over in Sydney, actually, I went to, I'm not sure if you know the company Canva, the social like image editing. I went over to their offices and they do like a little meetup. I say a little meetup, it was like 200 people and their offices are like incredible. They have like a full bar that they've just installed and they're brewing their own beer to supply into the bar. And like, it's a super legit setup. But
is Canva that big?
Yeah. So I did this exact thing, right? It's like they are exploding right now. They're doing really, really well. Like we have a Sydney office for HubSpot and it's like Sydney office, HubSpot and Canva are like often competing a lot on the recruitment piece. And yeah, I think they've just breached 200 employees and they're on a big recruitment hike right now. But yeah, if you're not going to join HubSpot in Sydney, I'd recommend going and chatting to the guys at Canva because they actually have a really awesome team in general, full of really interesting, smart people. So, but I was over there and I was chatting about this very thing, right? Just like lining up meetings. And the big thing people kept saying to me is, yeah, that's okay saying that, Matt, right? Like you've done a bunch of stuff. You've got cool experiments you can share with people. And for people that are basically, say, straight out of college, right? And they're like, why is someone going to just have a chat with me and do all this? It's like, the thing that I think people get too strung up on is the thought that someone is not going to spend time on you unless you can give them a ton of value. 9 times out of 10, I've been doing this kind of things for years. Like even when I was in college, right, I'd be like, I'm just going to try and chat to this person. If you just drop an email, you have nothing to lose, right? It's like, I would love to pick your brains for 10 minutes. If they're local, it's even easier because you'd be like, I'll buy you a coffee, right? It's like, you're probably going to go out for a coffee today, right? So just let me sit near you and ask you things for the duration of a coffee. And most people, as soon as you get one conversation lined up, then you can get an intro and then you can keep doing this kind of thing and it comes on from there. So I would say to anyone listening, like if you're thinking about doing this kind of thing, don't let it be a barrier thinking that someone's not going to spend time talking to you, because they absolutely will.
Yeah. And I think it's especially easy and effective if you're reaching out to people who don't really have any public presence, people who aren't like doing a blog, podcast, things like that. Because I imagine for you, you have a really popular marketing blog. And so you probably get a decent amount of inbound from people who like, hey, I want to take you out for coffee for half an hour and get free consulting, right?
Yeah.
And those are kind of a turnoff. But I imagine for people who don't really get that kind of inbound normally, just the thought that somebody like looked them up and is interested in what they're doing is probably enough value in of itself.
Right. And I think you can often solve a piece of that puzzle as well by literally, if you did a LinkedIn search, right, just look for people with the same job title as you, because at the end of the day, it's great if you can speak to someone who's had like years of experience and they're like VP at some big company, and you're just out of college and you're going into your first role in an agency. But to be honest, they've been away from like the nitty gritty of that work that you're going to be doing day in, day out for quite a while now. And like the most value you can get at this moment in time, that's such an easy reach, is just find someone who's doing the exact thing you're doing right now at a different company and just ask them, like, what are the problems that you're facing? And those kind of people, they're probably not necessarily going to have big brands, and you can pretty much always guarantee that you're going to be at least on the same level as them, right? Like from a career trajectory point of view. So it's a lot easier to chat through, and eventually you can speak to people in whole different scenarios and in different industries. And the thing that I really like about that as well is I always love speaking to people who are doing growth or marketing in like typically unsexy industries. Like when I was working at an agency in the UK, like I worked with some of the most unsexy clients in the world. Like they were like multi-billion-dollar companies, but it's like, for example, one of the companies was the largest manufacturer of wall plaster product, like construction building materials, right? They're like multi-billion-dollar company. And it's like you're selling to plasterers and building constructors. So it's like, you're not going to do an Instagram campaign, right? It's like, so
come watch paint dry.
Exactly, right. So like, and we did a bunch of stuff in like aerospace and stuff like one client that I remember having was they literally sold a valve that went inside another valve that went inside an oil rig. And there was literally under 200 people in the entire world that were the target market for this product. They were oil and gas instrumentation engineers in Aberdeen, Scotland. It was like, that's it. One sale of this is like multi-million.
Why did they have to be in Scotland?
It's just, funnily enough, in Aberdeen as well as Houston, it's just like full of these specific specialists in the oil and gas industry. And yeah, it was just one of those anomalies where it's like, well, okay, so I guess we know where everyone is. Do we just go knock on the door? Like,
probably not a lot of search volume for those terms.
And those things, those lessons I learned trying to solve those problems are some of the most valuable I've ever had, because there's a lot of times when you rely on those set trains of thought. And the more you funnel down those set trains of thought where you're like, okay, organic search, how many people are searching for this? Paid, what can we do? Can we retarget people on Facebook? It's like a lot of people will do this. That's just my go-to things, right? And you create these walls, these barriers of like thought process that you'll never go down in another route. And when those walls are put up against your like go-to channels, you have to just go, I need to think of something that I've never even considered. And a lot of the things you consider in other scenarios would be the most ridiculously stupid ideas you could ever think of, right? And I think it's just healthy for your mind to break out and try and solve problems in ways you've never had to solve before. And listening to other people that have to do that regularly, where they're not even thinking about organic search, because, it's like, this is like not even on their radar. They don't need to think about that. They're the conversations I love, because I'm just like, how did you even get to this thought? It's the most simplest thing for them, right? Like, because it's what they're living every day. So that's where I love those kind of things.
I think that's a huge challenge with marketing, but also with a lot of other professions, where just because something is written about the most and found the most online doesn't always mean that it's what you have to do or the only route that you can take. Because it's like some of the SEO stuff, a lot of the people who are putting it out there, it's like, well, they're also the best at SEO. And if you look for how to grow, a website or something, you're probably going to see a lot of SEO articles, but that's also because they know how to do it, right? You're not going to see things about like going and speaking at events or other topics that might not get as much play. So you almost have to deliberately filter your information sources to get that more diverse viewpoint. It seems like these meetings and conversations is a really good way for you to do that.
Agreed. Yeah. When I was at MozCon, I did a little bit about this in my talk. It was just like the first thing I showed was 5 random SEO case studies, right? Like we grew traffic from X and increased it by X%. Here's how. Like I've wrote these things before, right? People love hearing about the success. And the problem with that is like you rarely get the, hey, we fucked up our SEO and this is what happened, right? Like you don't get that. And you'll know this yourself. Like about 80% of the things that you try fail. And like people don't write a whole lot about that. Like on a regular basis, we fail repetitively on the acquisition team. But I think the most important thing is don't get too wound up in like you need to increase this by this in this period of time. And the only way you're going to do that is just keep getting win after win after win. You're going to kill yourself if you can't deal with that failure coming in because it can be really tough. I think the key thing is don't worry too much about all the different cool tactics that you can employ. It's this idea of just basically becoming like a bag of tricks that you can use. But if you can't take those tricks and apply them to a whole different scenario, your value as an individual is pretty much constrained to a very specific set of context and like environment that you're placed in. You get an offer for another role in a completely different industry doing a whole different type of thing, and then you get plunked into that and nothing that you know from that list of tactics works, you're in trouble. Like you have to become a master at solving problems. And to do that, the only way you can do it is to face a problem and fail at it. Because there's only one thing that you can kind of control here, and it's your ability to not do the same thing twice. So like you fail once, if you can say to yourself, okay, right, look, we failed at this once, I'm not going to do that again. And then you're basically removing out the things from your list that do not work. And you can just start narrowing down further and further. And as your experience grows, you can kind of come back to those like haunting memories of when all this stuff went wrong. And you just like, you'll start to get better and better and better. But you learn way less by getting wins than when you fail.
Yeah, I mean, sticking with some of the marketing examples, I feel like just contrasting, even for myself and for some of the companies I've worked with, the stuff that's working and the stuff that hasn't, like taking some time and digging in on the things that haven't worked and like, all right, what consistent differences are there between the ones that have? Like that's so informative. But I think there's like an ego element too, where we just kind of want to focus on the stuff that's done really well and say like, oh, well, you know, that one was bad luck. Or, oh, you know, Google wasn't feeling kind that day or whatever, right? But do you have a process or anything for doing these assessments after something maybe hasn't gone the way that you would like, whether that's like personal or within HubSpot?
Yeah, that's probably something that I would say of everything in acquisition we spend the most time on here is like, first of all, setting up an environment so that you actually can get some kind of data back, whether that's like qualitative or quantitative is a whole different thing. The process after of really digging into understanding the why behind the what. I think SEO in particular is the most dangerous channel to explore and think you're doing something right because something went right once. There's so many factors involved in what takes you from X to 1, and there is no 100% concrete way of ever knowing without a shadow of doubt that one variable was the reason for the outcome.
It's all correlation data.
Exactly, right? And this is like the reason why people can just tomorrow, some new person comes out and they're like, I'm an SEO expert. It's like no one can say that they're not because no one can prove that they're not.
It's not really falsifiable, yeah.
Right. There's such low barriers to entry to being like thought leader in like SEO and stuff because of this. And that's why it's so much more important to really try and get a grip on what you're doing and what the input and output. So what we do is we start with a super top level overview of listing out every single channel. And I actually use a framework that Brian Balfour put together. I'm not sure if you've spoke to Brian before from Reforge. And Brian basically put together this channel map. Basically, there's a number of different criteria involved for ranking. This kind of like if anyone's used the pie or ICE framework for prioritization, it's like what's the potential reach of this channel? What's the required costs? What's the resources needed from this internally? Like a few different factors. And then we create a weighted score on just the channel level. So we're like, okay, affiliate has the highest ranking score overall. We should dig deeper. And then we go one layer deeper. What are all the individual tests and experiments that we're trying to run that we've like hypothesized? And we do a similar thing in there, but we go one level deeper where we say like, what's the expected outcome of this? And how are we going to test it? And that's where we say, okay, right now is when we go in and we say, one recent thing that's an easier example to explain was we were doing some testing across a bunch of pages across the site where we were tweaking the title tags to follow a set taxonomy to try and increase click-through rate of those URLs. So like, okay, well, we're going to take a sample size of these URLs, compare them against a control group, and then we're going to measure click-through rate as the determination factor of success, and we'll run it for X period of time until we get statistical significance. When we get that, then we'll go, okay, right, now we need to dig a bit deeper to understand what's happened, whether it's bad or good, and try to like isolate this down to like one tiny thing. The big thing we found in SEO is trying to just test one thing at a time and trying to get granular. You're only going to get usually incremental wins, but what we try to do is anything we do, the test is not necessarily about getting the big win. The test is about proving like whether there's light at the end of the tunnel. And then we try to scale. So most of these things should be things that could be done more than a one-off situation. Because if it's a one-off situation, it's like, well, we may as well just do it, right? Like, let's just do it and see what happens. And then we start repeating, and see if we can add more scale to the specific thing we're doing until we've exhausted what that can do. And then we move to the next hypothesis and keep running through like that. And what we'll find is when we're going through the results, we'll often build up new hypotheses based on some of the things we found and what hasn't worked, and other teams will be like, oh, hey, we can use that thing in this thing that we're doing over here that you guys didn't even know about. And a big part of that is we have an internal company wiki that I would say HubSpotters read more than the HubSpot blog by far. Everyone reads the wiki, right? And it's like, first thing is publish all the results for the team. Then we publish on the company-wide wiki, and people like try like growth hacking our wiki. It's like get more likes, get to like the top. It's like, and that really helps as well because it's like sharing of knowledge. And the final piece, if it goes really well, is like, okay, well, now we'll publish something on the blog. And that solves as well for talent acquisition. People see it, they're like, whoa, HubSpot are doing this really cool shit. I want to come and join Matt's team or one of the other people's team. It's like, that'd be really awesome. And then we use that as talent acquisition as well as like our own like education piece. So it's like comes full circle into it.
Well, that way of framing everything as knowledge and education, I think is so helpful for making the little failures or things that haven't worked out yet much less scary, because it's a very subtle terminological difference. But I feel like when you just think of it as data and information and knowledge, then you remove the judgments on, oh, this was bad, this was good, like Matt did good, Matt did bad, right? I feel like that's probably really helpful and something that pretty much anybody could use.
Agreed. And a lot of the time, when you're thinking about what are my goals, right? A lot of people will be like, okay, by the end of this year, I want to get to X, or sometimes it'll be quarterly, right? Or maybe even monthly. Like, okay, I want to get to X. And a lot of those goals are quite far away from just your one single thing that you want to test. So a lot of people will say, okay, should we do this? Yes or no? And the thing that will determine whether they should definitely do this thing is how close to our bigger picture goal is it going to get to us? What that often means is you're only going to work on the things that you think are like huge wins. And they're like big risk because if they do pay off, great, you get this big win. But a lot of the time, those huge payoffs can't be replicated. That's like the challenge. Like the bigger the scale, it's hard to repeat. So then next month, you need to roll the dice and hope that you get that big win and it succeeds again, as opposed to being like, okay, forget about this month. Right? Let's think about this half of the year. This month, we're going to get no growth. And we're going to be okay with that because what we're going to do is we're going to find out and answer questions. We're going to answer these 10 questions and prove this out. By the end of the month, we'll have answers to at least 5 of these. And these answers will tell us how to solve the problems for the next 4 months. And like, that's a much more sustainable and a healthy way, in my opinion, to think about these things. So you're not getting to the end of the month. Every month you're like, oh man, fuck, like I can barely sleep. I need to just get like quick wins. And you go and you just blast your email database, churn a bunch of people, trying to basically just create wins from these made up numbers that don't really mean anything in the long-term success of your business. They're just basically milestones for you to make you feel better. And that's where I think it's so much more important to try and get granular, because when you get granular and you don't get big wins, you need some kind of output to at least let you know you're doing something right. Right? It's like, and when something fails, if you can still say to yourself, I've done something right by learning the outcome of that failure, you're gonna keep with it, and you're gonna keep going. You'll actually stick to a plan as opposed to just jumping and zigzagging off, flailing, trying to hit some magic number that you've put in an Excel sheet.
That was something that was hard for me when I was working at Sumo, where I think the biggest challenge was we were very, very metrics driven, which was good for lighting a fire, under your ass.
Yeah.
But then it became hard when you wanted to work on things that maybe weren't going to lead directly to helping those numbers, or wouldn't for 6 or 12 months. And so it was hard to try to find that balance between, okay, we do have to hit our sales numbers, right? Like, company needs to make money, but then also making the time to experiment with longer term stuff.
Yeah, it's really tough. And like, we still have that challenge, right? We're a public company. We do earning calls every quarter, right? And if those earning calls don't look great, that means our stock price goes down. It means all of our shareholders, including all of our employees, lose money, right? So we still have to balance that. But when you've got all of that pressure on like your chest, I think the obvious thing is to have just like a knee-jerk panic reaction. I think that's what can separate marketers and pretty much anyone in a role where they're focused around like really high pressure numbers, is to be able to take a step back, have a breather, be like, it's okay if I don't grow these numbers for these next 7 days. And it's actually okay if I miss these, as long as I have a plan and I feel I'm in control. And being in control of that takes a lot of time to really understand all the different variables in a situation. And if you're okay with that, and still someone's like, look, you're not doing a good enough job, this is not good enough, like, you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're the one who controls what you can do. And if someone else doesn't like that, then that's kind of like unfortunate, because you need to work towards a plan that you think is going to work.
No, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, we've talked a lot about the during HubSpot stuff, but I know we have to be a little conscious of time. So I also kind of wanted to hear about before HubSpot, because you went in and kind of immediately got that cool technical SEO win that you were talking about. So you obviously knew a good amount of this stuff before they approached you. So how did you learn it? What were you working on before with the consulting, and how were you picking up this skill set initially?
Yeah, I started digging in like a lot of SEOs, or say with anyone that first went into SEO as their route. Like when I was in college, I was basically like, I have no money. I need to figure out a way to make some money. And SEO was a great way of me to like figure out how to make money.
How did you discover that was a good opportunity?
It was just like, I started out with just exploring and doing very poorly, like Black Hat SEO and affiliate. And I was just doing like the crappiest stuff, just basically spamming the internet to try and make some cash. And this was before like...
You and I both.
Yeah. And this was kind of before Google's like Big Penguin algorithm update. So like it was a lot cheaper back then to do this. The barriers to entry were a little lower. And I was like, okay, cool. I was pretty shitty at it, but I like figured a few things out, and I was like, this is interesting to me. And during my last years of university, I took on this role at a marketing agency, tiny. There was like 3 of us in what could only be described as a large shed, right? And it was like, we're doing like local
with Wi-Fi, hopefully.
Right, just about, right? Just about. And I was getting paid like nothing, like near enough minimum wage. But I was just all of a sudden getting to work on more legit projects. And this is more like local stuff. But I was like, okay, I'm starting to connect dots of this super scrappy stuff that I started doing towards a real application. I think that comes back to this whole like exploring routes that you would never have taken before. Like understanding things like Black Hat SEO was super interesting, because I suddenly started to connect the dots of how search engines work and why links are important, as opposed to just, I need to go build links, right? Like I understood the why behind the what, and I was still pretty shitty at it, but I was like, okay, I was getting in the office at like 6 a.m. and I was leaving at like 11 p.m. some nights, and I still had all my college stuff, but I was just there because I wanted to be. Like no one was forcing me. I was super excited and I was just learning. And I finished university and everyone of my friends went and took their grad jobs and got like probably 10x on my salary. And I was like, no, do you know what? I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to stay. And I earned minimum wage pretty much for 3 years. And I'm just going to stay here and just be in wherever the problems are. I'm not going to chase the salary. And even when I moved into kind of like my next role at a bigger agency, I was like, I could have definitely earned double if I'd have just went into a set role. But I was like, no, what my thing that I'm going to just do is go wherever the problems are. And I just exposed myself to a bunch of these weird, random, bizarre problems, like trying to sell a valve that goes into another valve to oil and gas engineers, right? It's like all these different things. And then started doing side hustles and delving into other pieces and started getting a bunch of wins, which was really great. And one thing that kind of fell really fortuitously for me was the big Panda update in Google happened. And the Penguin update happened. And I started doing a bunch of search engine recovery projects for people because I just understood link architecture. And that got me in the doors of a bunch of big companies. And I was really good at it because I understood it. And it was great because it was unsexy work. And a lot of the bigger names in SEO, right, they didn't want to do that shit. It was rough work. But I had Fortune 500 companies that were like getting in touch because they're desperate, right? They're like, shit, we just lost all our revenue. And I'm like, I can solve this for you. So I did that and did all the shitty work, stayed up every night doing this crap and started to get a few breaks and started meeting up with more people. And eventually when I felt like I had enough knowledge, started creating some blog posts that were just, this is how I do things. And I kind of got a bit of traction with that because I would just write like 10,000 word articles on everything of how everything was done. And then more and more opportunities came, and it was kind of just this knock-on effect that eventually I knew like the salary is going to come. It was soul destroying at times, like when you see everyone and they've like got nice cars and shit, and you're scrapping it out, like
hanging out in the shed.
Right. My girlfriend at the time was covering most of our rent, and it was like it felt pretty crappy, but I have zero regrets right now because all of that tough stuff that I was doing just helped me surround myself with these unique problems. And anytime I face a problem now, I always track back to that time where I was faced with these just bizarre scenarios and how I tried to solve them back then.
Where did that comfort come from? Because most people wouldn't graduate university with the confidence to just focus on this thing that they're super interested in and assume that the money will work itself out later. Is there anything you can point to that you think made you more comfortable with going that route for the first few years?
Yeah, I think the thing that kept me... So the thing that I really didn't want to do was get stuck into a role where I wasn't going to learn. I developed a taste for learning about like organic search and generally the realities of marketing. And I really enjoyed the chase of pitching for business when we were like a tiny outfit and no one should really have worked with us because we had no credibility. And like, then we were able to do it. And I was like, oh, I like this stuff. But I kind of just had to really believe that what I was able to do would eventually pay off. And the thing that kept me balanced a lot of the time is whenever I would see and speak to people that had been successful, the same kind of things come up. Like outside of like the more freak occurrences where you've got like 24-year-old guy who's like a multi-billionaire, which is mostly the stuff that people hear about. And they're like, shit, I need to be a billionaire by now, right? Like doesn't happen. Barely anyone makes money between the ages of 20 to even to around 30 in most cases. You don't make a lot of money during that time. And the reality is that's the period of your life when you can afford to not make a lot of money. Most people start thinking about having children around like 28 onwards. Of course, it's not the same for everyone, but and then you're thinking about a mortgage for your house around then. Like it's fine to be poor then. So be poor when you can be poor and surround yourselves with the experience to do that, creating like small milestones along the way. I remember being like, I actually remember being like, do you know, one of the things I'd really love is be able to publish an article on like the Moz blog. And I remember doing it and I was like, it was all worthwhile. I've made it, right? It was like little things like that I look back at and laugh now, but those are the things that kept me sane. And I was like, I want to get my first speaking gig, did my speaking gig. And I was like, yeah, that was great. I cringe when I remember how bad a speaker I was back then, but like it was those tiny milestones that kept going. And my goal was like, look, I want to start making money closer to the 35 period of time. So this is the time when I just have to do all the shit that I kind of don't really want to do and just keep doing it. The great thing was I did enjoy it the whole way through. And knowing that I was continuously progressing kept me on track. There's been a lot of curveballs, but I've definitely been very fortunate in being able to get a few good breaks. I don't think they're lucky, but like there've been breaks all the same. Moved to different countries. And for me, this is still the start of the journey, right? And I think the toughest thing is just being patient. Everyone wants things now. I'm still incredibly impatient. Like I'm my own worst enemy. Like it's horrendous. Like I think most of the time, the only thing that keeps me sane in any way is my wife. It's like, just relax, right? Like it's fine. The thing that always grounds me is when I just go, what was I doing 2 years ago? What was I doing 3 years ago? What was I doing 4 years ago? Right. And I'm like, okay, so 4 years time from now, if I could maintain that trajectory, I'll be great. So that's the way I try to rationalize my own irrational mind.
No, I feel you, because that impulse, that desire to, I think of it as the desire to like have already arrived, right? Like, oh, I should already be there, right? Or I should have already accomplished this. And I think that our minds always go to the maybe like one or two super salient, crazy examples of somebody who did something so young and so early, and it just makes you go like, oh, like why haven't I done that? And we never focus on everyone who did something later, right? Or anybody that you have a leg up on historically. And then especially just with extremely rough measures like income, right? When you graduate from a university or a high school, and then you've got everybody else you graduated with, there's always going to be somebody, except for one person, who's making more than you, right? And it's like such a hard impulse to turn off, that constant comparison to other people. I'm just trying to remember that, like, okay, it's a process. You've got time. And especially if you're in your 20s, right? Like you've got a lot of time.
Oh man, yeah.
Like I don't remember where I saw it, but it's like the information on startup founders and a lot of the big names that we think about now, and how many of them were actually starting it in college or in their early 20s versus how many of them actually started it late 20s, 30s. It's much more in the second camp, but it's not as interesting of a story, right? It doesn't get the clicks, doesn't get the headlines. And so we get a really bad, what is it, like availability heuristic, where we just assume that, oh, everybody's way ahead of us, way outperforming us, and we need to catch up.
Yeah, and it is a really toxic thing for anyone new. And I think it's only getting worse and worse and worse, right? Like people who are just starting a career right now come out and they're like, right, how do I make my first million before I'm 25? And you're like, that is not a realistic expectation. Sure, I'm not saying that you are not going to do that, but don't set yourself that as your first milestone. But the other thing is, what will that get you? Right? Like the thing I like to think is one of the challenges a lot of people face, especially like young people, is the main determination of success for a lot of people, especially in tech, is income. How much money do I earn? How much stock do I have? And it's like, okay, I want to get to this level of income by now. So, okay, if you made $1 million by 25, what then? You're going to want to make $2 million by 26. How do you double that? Right? And then how do you quadruple that? How do you maintain that trajectory to maintain a consistent curve of happiness with that, or at least sense of achievement? And to enable you to do that, you can't just get a lucky break, right? Like, okay, something happened. It was like, oh, wow, I wasn't really expecting this. I'm not quite prepared for it. This happened to me. It's like a ton of people that get tons of VC funding at an early age. Like the majority of businesses die, right?
Well, that's the VC model. 90% are going to fail, right?
Exactly. And it fucks with people's lives as well, right? Like you've got to get yourself, like my personal belief is to try and get yourself to a feeling where you are comfortable with the fact the level of income you're at right now is at least at a reasonable level comparable to where you believe you are in terms of experience, the things you've faced, and your ability to grow that revenue. Like if you're really making big plans for, I want to get to X revenue, like You don't need to drop everything and start your own company. You could go in a company if you want to. You don't need to go to a big company. You don't need to do anything. If you want to make money, the likelihood is you can make money, but can you sustain that, right? And can you actually be happy in the process? That's where it's really shit to just go and compare yourself to outliers, which is what all of those people are, right? They're complete freak occurrences that rarely ever happen, but are the majority of news headlines.
And there will always be somebody else to compare yourself to. It's like, no matter who you are, no matter how high up that totem pole you get, there's always going to be somebody else where you'll get there. I'll be like, I'm still not quite there yet. And so I feel like the solution isn't to strive relentlessly towards being that person. It is on some level, right? Like, it's good to be driven, but at the same time, almost getting over some of that impulse to constantly feel like, oh, I'm not there yet. Oh, not good enough.
Yeah. And it is tough. Like, I am slightly hypocritical in this sense because I'm saying all this, but I still do this in my mind a lot. And it is a product as well of like the environment. I think the thing that I find most difficult but most rewarding when I can do it is evaluating my happiness. And a lot of time being able to separate that grandiose thinking of how am I doing against fucking Elon Musk, right? Like, Elon Musk is just going to be there forever in like the rarefied atmosphere, just taunting like my
I wonder who he's envious of.
Right. And I would imagine for a lot of those people that are at that level, they're way more critical on their self-happiness. And it's a lot difficult to become happier when you're miserable. Not to say that those people are, but like, it's in theory a lot easier to gain wealth, right? Like, there are a lot less factors involved in wealth gain than happiness gain. And being able to actually evaluate how happy you are is going to be like going a long way towards really, truly being happy with your own situation and growth.
Yeah. And if you can't be happy at that baseline, sufficiency income, and you think that you're going to be happy at 100, 500, whatever K a year, like you're probably not. It's going to be that same stuff making you unhappy that you neglected in pursuit of more. And that's sort of a hard thing to remind ourselves of. I mean, it goes back to what you were saying before, right? Where you kind of focused on being good instead of getting the highest income, right? You have to focus on these other things that are scarier to focus on, becoming good as opposed to making more money, like becoming happy and enjoying, what you're doing as opposed to just like making as much as possible. And I mean, even bringing it back to SEO, this is something I see a lot, and probably that you see a lot too, where somebody doesn't have good content or information and they want it to rank really well. And it's like, well, no, you have to do the upfront work. You have to make sure whatever you're doing is good. And like, then you can get good results from it. But the over focus on results, like trying to shortcut the process, usually doesn't work out well, or it might work out well really briefly in a hacky kind of way. And then it all falls apart pretty quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I think that's actually a perfect note for us to go ahead and wrap up on. This was a ton of fun. I'm really glad that we got to actually get on and chat for once. And maybe next time it'll be a little more egalitarian. But I mean, the one thing we didn't get to that I would really encourage everyone to check out is your blog. It's fantastic. It's one of the only probably 3 marketing related blogs that I read anymore. And it was actually part of the inspiration for me early on too, when I started working in some of this, for incredibly dense, high value articles that are useful for like years to come. So I'll link to your site, MatthewBarby.com. Is there anywhere else that people should go to find you around the internet?
You can always grab me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and I would encourage anyone listening that wants to pick my brain, catch up, maybe over like one of like the weekly meetings I tend to do, just reach out to me. I'll try and make it happen.
That's fantastic. Well, Matt, thank you so much, and I'll see you on Twitter.
Yeah. See you later, man.
Have a good one. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Nat Chat. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe to Nat Chat in iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Second, if you're trying to take advantage of some of the information from this episode, be sure you check out the show notes at nateliason, nateliason.com/podcast, and find a friend, because implementing a lot of this stuff is much easier if you have somebody to do it with. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode and you've been enjoying other episodes of the podcast, please leave it a review on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your casts, so that more people can find it. This is the best way for it to get some more exposure and to make sure that I can keep bringing these episodes to you. With that, thank you and have an awesome rest of your day.